And then we met up with, what was his name again? The tall fellow. I can't think of it right now. Do you remember?
There is a moment most of us know. You are mid-sentence, reaching for a name, someone you have known for years, and it simply is not there. Just blank space where the word should be. And in that pause, something tightens in your chest. Because you wonder if that blank space is getting a little bigger every year. I want to talk to you about that fear today. Not to dismiss it, it is real, and it deserves a serious answer. But I also want to show you something that most people never connect to that moment of fog. It is breakfast. Specifically, it is the foods sitting on your table right now that you believe are protecting your health. In my neurology clinic, I see this pattern every single week. Patients eating carefully, making what they believe are smart morning choices, and unknowingly feeding a biological process that accelerates cognitive decline. Today, we are going through 5 of those foods, and then 5 things to replace them with. Stay with me through all of them, because the number one worst offender is one almost no one suspects. Bran muffins. Let me start with something that feels almost virtuous. The bran muffin. It sits in the bakery case, wrapped in parchment, dense and wholesome looking. High in fiber, right? Good for digestion, good for you. That is exactly what the packaging wants you to believe. But here is what is actually inside a commercial bran muffin. Refined white flour, 2 to 4 tablespoons of added sugar, seed oils, and yes, a little bran. Usually far less than the label implies, because the bran is there for marketing, not for nutrition. What you are really eating is cake. Cake with better branding. Now, why does this matter for your brain specifically? Think about what happens in the hour after you eat that muffin. The refined starch and sugar hit your bloodstream fast, a sharp glucose spike, followed by a reactive drop. That drop is not just fatigue. That drop is your hippocampus losing fuel during what should be a peak cognitive window in your morning. Research from the ELSA Brazil cohort, which tracked over 10,000 adults for nearly a decade, found that getting more than 20% of daily calories from ultra-processed foods was linked to 28% faster global cognitive decline. Bran muffins, bought from a coffee shop or a grocery store, fall squarely into that category. Here is the practical test I give my patients. Look at the ingredient list. If the product comes wrapped in plastic and has more than 8 ingredients, it is not a health food, regardless of what the front of the package says. The word bran on the label does not change the metabolic reality of what is inside. The brain after 60 is less forgiving of these repeated glucose swings. Each one quietly shifts your metabolism in a direction you do not want it to go, and by the time it becomes noticeable, the pattern has usually been running for years. For now, just know that the bran muffin is not a breakfast. It is a dessert in disguise. And the next food on this list wears an even more convincing costume. Commercial orange juice. This one is harder for people to let go of. Orange juice has been on the American breakfast table for nearly a century. It feels clean and natural. It has vitamin C. Your doctor probably never told you not to drink it. And yet, from a neurological standpoint, a glass of commercial orange juice in the morning is one of the worst things you can put in an aging brain. Here is why. When you eat a whole orange, the fiber in that fruit slows the absorption of fructose, the sugar in fruit, so your body gets a gradual, manageable delivery. When you drink a glass of juice, that fiber is gone. You are delivering the fructose load of 3 to 4 oranges directly into your bloodstream all at once, with nothing to slow it down. Fructose, without fiber, metabolizes differently than glucose. In the process, it generates uric acid as a byproduct. An elevated uric acid triggers inflammation directly in the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for forming and retrieving memories. Animal models have shown this connection clearly, and the human epidemiological data points the same direction. But there is something else. Fructose in large amounts reduces blood flow to the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, and the thalamus, the exact regions responsible for memory, reasoning, and impulse control. Researchers describe this as an ancient foraging response. Fructose signals the brain to slow down and conserve energy, as if you have just found a fruit tree and need to store calories for winter. Your brain, in other words, is not confused. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that the design was never meant for breakfast. That is the opposite of what you want your brain doing at 8 in the morning. I know the instinct is to say, but it is natural sugar. The source matters less than the delivery mechanism. Without fiber, your body cannot tell the difference between orange juice and a soft drink. And neither can your hippocampus. Swap the glass of juice for a whole orange. Same vitamin C, completely different metabolic story. Now here is where it gets a little more personal, because the next food is not just marketed to you, it was recommended to you, possibly by your doctor. Fat-free fruit yogurt. Now let me tell you about a patient I see versions of constantly in my clinic. She is doing everything right, she thinks. She cut the fat out of her diet years ago on doctor's advice. Every morning she has a small container of fat-free strawberry yogurt. Low calorie, calcium, probiotics. She has been eating it for 15 years. And she cannot understand why her memory screening keeps flagging early concerns. Here is what is happening inside that little container. When food manufacturers strip the fat out of yogurt, the product tastes like nothing. So they replace it with sugar, often a lot of sugar. Some popular fat-free fruit yogurts contain more sugar per serving than a can of cola. The label says healthy, the biology says otherwise. But the sugar is only part of the problem. Your brain is roughly 60% fat by dry weight. It is not a metaphor. It is structural. The membranes of your neurons, the sheaths around your nerve fibers, the junctions where signals pass between cells, all of it requires dietary fat to maintain its integrity. DHA, in particular, a long-chain omega-3 fatty acid, is the primary building material for neuronal membranes. When you spend years choosing fat-free, you are not just avoiding calories. You are quietly depriving your neurons of the raw material they need to stay sound. And then there is the gut. Full-fat fermented dairy supports a diverse gut microbiome. That diversity matters more than most people realize. Research consistently shows that microbiome diversity is directly linked to reduced neuroinflammation and slower cognitive decline in older adults. The gut-brain axis is not a theory anymore. It is one of the most active areas of neuroscience research, and the evidence points clearly toward fat-containing fermented foods as protective, not dangerous. And there is a downstream consequence to all of this that most people never connect to their yogurt. The inflammation that builds from a disrupted gut and a sugar-loaded diet does not stay in the gut. It travels, and the structure that is supposed to stop it from reaching your brain is not as solid as you might think. We will get to that barrier when we talk about number 2 on this list, because what happens there is something most people have never considered. Now, if you are choosing the diet version of fat-free yogurt, the one sweetened with artificial sweeteners instead of sugar, the news is not better. A large cohort study published in Neurology in 2025, following over 12,000 adults for 8 years, found that high artificial sweetener consumption was associated with cognitive decline equivalent to roughly 1.5 additional years of brain aging. Aspartame, saccharin, acesulfame K, all implicated. The fix here is straightforward. Plain, full-fat Greek yogurt. Real fruit on top if you want sweetness. This is a simple swap that restores fat, cuts the sugar load, and keeps the probiotic benefit intact. Your neurons will notice the difference before you do. The next food on this list is trickier because it is not what is in it that causes the problem. It is what was taken out. Whole wheat toast with margarine. I want to be precise here because whole wheat toast alone is not the villain. Whole grain bread, eaten in reasonable amounts, has a place in a balanced diet. The problem is what most people spread on it, and what margarine actually is. Margarine was invented as a cheaper substitute for butter. It is made from vegetable oils that have been chemically altered, hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, to become solid at room temperature. Modern versions are marketed as trans fat-free, which sounds like progress. But removing trans fats did not remove the problem. What remains is a product built from refined seed oils, soybean, canola, sunflower. These oils are highly processed, chemically unstable, and pro-inflammatory. Here is where the neurology gets important. Research on high-fat emulsion diets shows that synthetic and inflammatory fats disrupt the tight junction proteins in the blood-brain barrier. That barrier is exactly what it sounds like, the wall that keeps inflammatory compounds out of your brain tissue. When it becomes more permeable, those compounds get through, and the brain tissue on the other side is vulnerable in ways that accumulate quietly over years. The brain does need fat. That point is not up for debate. But it needs the right kind. DHA, found in animal fats, fatty fish, and pasture-raised eggs, is what neurons actually use to build and repair their membranes. Seed oils and hydrogenated fats do not contribute to that process. They compete with it, displacing the fats your brain would otherwise use. And here is the compounding problem with this particular breakfast. Whole wheat bread, especially commercial varieties, still carries a relatively high glycemic index. So the toast spikes blood sugar while the margarine simultaneously works against the barrier designed to protect the brain from the inflammation that spike creates. Two problems at once. From a breakfast that looks completely reasonable. If you want toast, have it. But put real butter on it, or better yet, a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil. The difference in what reaches your brain is not small. And that brings us to number 1. This is the one I want you to think carefully about. Because unlike everything else on this list, this one has genuinely earned its healthy reputation. The problem runs much deeper than the label. Instant flavored oatmeal. We have arrived at the one I want you to sit with. Everything we have covered so far. The muffins, the juice, the fat-free yogurt, the margarine. Those are relatively easy to dismiss once you understand the biology. But this one is different, because this one has genuinely earned its health reputation. Oats are real food. The fiber is real. The nutritional research behind whole oats is legitimate and substantial. The problem is not oatmeal. The problem is what most people over 60 are actually eating every morning when they think they are eating oatmeal. Instant flavored oatmeal. The kind that comes in individual packets, apple cinnamon, maple brown sugar, peaches and cream, is a fundamentally different product from the oat grain it started as. To make it instant, the oats are pre-cooked, then dried, then rolled paper thin so they dissolve almost immediately in hot water. The structural fiber that slows glucose absorption is largely destroyed in that process. What you are left with is something your digestive system treats closer to a bowl of refined cereal than a whole grain. A controlled study comparing 5 cereal types found that instant oats produced a glucose peak nearly 30% higher than steel-cut oats, despite being matched for identical carbohydrate content. The insulin spike was even more pronounced, and that gap matters enormously after 60, because the insulin surge that follows sets off a reactive blood glucose dip roughly 90 to 120 minutes later, right when most people sit down to read, think, or have a real conversation with someone they love. That dip is not just inconvenient. Repeated over months and years, it is exactly the mechanism behind brain insulin resistance, the state where neurons stop responding to insulin signals and begin to starve even when blood sugar is high. Some researchers now call this process type 3 diabetes, because the pattern mirrors what happens in the body in type 2, but the damage is happening inside the brain itself. Now add the flavoring packets: apple cinnamon, maple brown sugar. Those push the glycemic load even higher, and they introduce the same artificial sweetener risks we covered in the yogurt section, depending on which version you buy. There is one more thing about instant oats that almost no one talks about, and it has nothing to do with sugar or fiber or glycemic index. It is something entirely physical, something your jaw does, or in this case, does not do. Research shows that chewing firmer foods stimulates the trigeminal nerve, which increases cerebral blood flow and raises glutathione levels in the anterior cingulate cortex, a key antioxidant that declines in Alzheimer's disease. Instant oats require almost no chewing. They dissolve before your jaw does any real work. That entire neuroprotective mechanism, activated simply by the physical act of chewing something with substance, is bypassed completely. This is why it sits at number 1. Not because oatmeal is bad, but because the version most seniors eat every morning has been processed into something that actively works against the brain it was supposed to fuel. The health halo is real. The biology underneath it is not. Buckwheat, kasha, with ghee. Most people in this country have never tried buckwheat, and that is genuinely a shame, because it is one of the most brain-friendly grains available at a standard grocery store. Buckwheat. Specifically, toasted buckwheat groats, what Eastern European and Jewish cuisines have called kasha for centuries. First, a clarification. Buckwheat is not wheat. It is not even a grain in the botanical sense. It is a seed, completely gluten-free, and its starch structure digests significantly more slowly than modern wheat or processed oats. That slower digestion means a sustained, steady release of glucose to the brain, not a spike, not a crash. Just a stable supply of fuel across your morning. This is the direct replacement for instant oatmeal. Same warm bowl, same comfort, completely different metabolic outcome. Now the ghee. Ghee is clarified butter. Butter with the milk solids removed, leaving pure golden fat. It is rich in butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that feeds the cells lining your gut wall, reduces intestinal permeability, and lowers neuroinflammation through the gut-brain axis. This is the opposite of what margarine does to that same system. Buckwheat also brings meaningful amounts of magnesium and rutin, a flavonoid that supports vascular health and cerebral blood flow. After 60, vascular contributions to cognitive decline are significant, and rutin specifically supports the flexibility and integrity of small blood vessels in the brain. From a practical standpoint, kasha is available in most grocery stores in Eastern European markets and easily online. It cooks in about 15 minutes. The texture is nutty and satisfying, nothing like the thin, sweet paste of an instant oat packet. Cook it, stir in a small spoonful of ghee, and you have a breakfast that fuels your brain rather than spending the next 2 hours undermining it. The next option works on a completely different system, and it is one I recommend specifically for people who told me they never have time in the morning. Chia seed pudding with pumpkin seeds. Here is a breakfast you can make tonight and simply pull from the refrigerator tomorrow morning. No cooking, no timing, just preparation, which for many of my patients turns out to be the difference between a brain-protective morning and a rushed one. Chia seed pudding with pumpkin seeds addresses two deficiencies I see repeatedly in seniors that standard breakfast foods do almost nothing about: magnesium and zinc. Both minerals are chronically low in older adults, and both are essential for what happens inside your synapses, the junctions where one neuron passes a signal to the next. Magnesium regulates how easily those signals fire. Zinc keeps glutamate signaling in balance, which matters because when glutamate goes unchecked, neurons essentially burn themselves out in a process called excitotoxicity. It sounds dramatic because it is. Pumpkin seeds are one of the richest dietary sources of both. A small handful, maybe 2 tablespoons scattered on top of your pudding, delivers a meaningful dose of each. Now the chia seeds themselves. They provide plant-based omega-3 fatty acids in the form of ALA, along with soluble fiber that does something very specific in your digestive tract. It forms a gel. That gel physically slows the rate at which carbohydrates enter your bloodstream. It is not a metaphor. You can watch it happen if you leave chia seeds in water for 20 minutes. That same process happens in your gut, and the result is a slow, stable glucose curve rather than a spike. Add a pinch of cinnamon. Research suggests cinnamon improves insulin sensitivity, a small but real effect that compounds over time, especially when the rest of your breakfast is already working in the same direction. One practical note for those with chewing difficulties: pumpkin seeds can be ground completely and stirred into the pudding. You will not lose any of the mineral benefit. The zinc and magnesium are in the seed itself, not dependent on the texture. Prepare it the night before. Add a handful of pumpkin seeds in the morning. That is the entire routine. Now I want to revisit something I mentioned earlier: the neurotransmitter most directly tied to why you walk into a room and forget why you came. Because the next breakfast targets it specifically. Savory cottage cheese with walnuts. I want to reframe something before we go further. Cottage cheese has a reputation problem. It carries the weight of mid-century diet culture, the sad scoop next to half a canned peach, eaten by someone who really wanted something else. I understand why people walk past it. But the neuroscience behind it is genuinely compelling, so stay with me. Cottage cheese is one of the better dietary sources of choline available at a standard grocery store. Choline is the direct precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter most tightly linked to memory and learning. As we age, the brain's ability to produce acetylcholine declines. That decline is not a minor inconvenience. It is one of the defining features of Alzheimer's pathology. The drugs most commonly prescribed for early Alzheimer's work by slowing the breakdown of acetylcholine, which tells you something about how critical that molecule is. Research tracking large populations found that moderate daily choline intake, roughly in the range of 187 to 400 milligrams, was associated with a 40 to 50% reduction in the odds of poor cognitive performance across multiple domains, including verbal fluency, learning, and processing speed. Cottage cheese moves the needle in that direction without any supplementation required. Pair it with walnuts and the picture gets even stronger. Walnuts are the only nut with meaningful omega-3 content. Higher blood omega-3 levels are consistently associated with lower dementia risk in large population studies, and the walnut's fat profile maps closely onto what the brain actually needs to maintain membrane integrity. Eat this savory. Olive oil, cracked black pepper, a few slices of cucumber or tomato alongside. No added sugar, glycemic load near zero, preparation time measured in minutes. I have patients who now eat this 4 or 5 mornings a week. Not because I told them it was virtuous, but because once they understood what was happening inside their neurons, the choice made sense on its own. The next breakfast builds on that same foundation, but it adds something no plant-based source can replicate. Soft-boiled eggs with turmeric and black pepper. If I could choose one breakfast food for every patient over 60, it would be this one. Not because eggs are trendy, not because of any particular diet movement, but because a soft-boiled egg delivers a combination of nutrients that the aging brain specifically needs. Choline, DHA, lutein, and B vitamins, all in one small package, all at once, first thing in the morning. We already talked about choline in the cottage cheese section. Eggs take that further. A single pasture-raised egg contains roughly 150 milligrams of choline in a highly bioavailable form, meaning your body absorbs and uses most of what it gets. 2 eggs at breakfast puts you well inside the protective range the research identifies for cognitive function. No supplementation needed, no measuring, just eggs. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Cholesterol. Let me address that directly. The science on dietary cholesterol has shifted substantially over the past 2 decades. Eggs consumed in reasonable amounts have minimal impact on cardiovascular risk in most people. And here is something your brain needs you to understand. Cholesterol is not the enemy your neurons are protecting themselves from. It is a raw material they require. Your brain uses cholesterol to produce myelin, the insulating sheath around nerve fibers, and to maintain the structural integrity of synaptic connections. Depriving the brain of dietary cholesterol does not protect it. It removes a building block it depends on. Why soft-boiled specifically? Because the yolk matters, and heat is not kind to it. The DHA and choline in an egg yolk are fragile. When you scramble eggs at high heat or cook them hard, you oxidize a meaningful portion of those fatty acids. The soft yolk, warm but still runny, preserves them. It is a small detail. It is also the right detail. Now, the turmeric and black pepper. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, crosses the blood-brain barrier. Multiple studies have shown it reduces amyloid plaque formation and suppresses neuroinflammation, 2 of the central processes in Alzheimer's pathology. But here is the detail that separates practical advice from generic health content. Curcumin on its own is very poorly absorbed. Your digestive system processes most of it before it ever reaches circulation. Black pepper changes that equation entirely. Piperine, a compound in black pepper, increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000%. That is not a typo. The pairing is not culinary decoration, it is biochemistry. Turmeric without black pepper is a gesture. Turmeric with black pepper is a mechanism. A pinch of each, stirred into a small amount of olive oil and drizzled over your eggs, or simply seasoned directly onto the plate. The preparation takes 30 seconds. the biological effect is meaningfully different from what you get without it. 2 soft-boiled eggs, turmeric, black pepper. A breakfast built around what your neurons actually require. Sardines on sourdough. I want to give you permission to be surprised by this one. Sardines for breakfast sounds like a provocation. I understand that. But I am going to ask you to set aside the reaction for a moment, because this combination, sardines on real sourdough, is arguably the single most neuroprotective morning meal you can assemble from a standard grocery store. When I look at everything the aging brain needs and map it against what is available and affordable, nothing else comes close. Here is why sardines, specifically, most sources of omega-3 fatty acids, require your body to do conversion work before the DHA reaches your brain. Sardines skip most of that process. They are one of the richest dietary sources of LPC-DHA, lysophosphatidylcholine-bound DHA, the form the brain absorbs most directly and efficiently. After 60, your brain's ability to maintain its own DHA levels declines steadily. Sardines correct that decline in a way that plant-based omega-3 sources simply cannot match. The evidence behind this is worth stating plainly. Higher blood omega-3 levels are associated with a 35 to 40% lower risk of early-onset dementia in large population studies. Fatty fish provides LPC-DHA in the most bioavailable form available outside a clinical supplement. And sardines deliver it alongside B12, selenium, and calcium, 3 nutrients commonly deficient in older adults that affect neurological function, nerve conduction, and bone health simultaneously. Now, the sourdough distinction matters too. Not all bread sold as sourdough is real sourdough. Real sourdough is long fermented. The sour taste tells you the fermentation happened properly, and that fermentation process partially breaks down the starch and produces organic acids that slow glucose absorption. The glycemic index of genuine long-fermented sourdough is substantially lower than standard whole wheat bread. It behaves differently in your body because it structurally is different. So the combination delivers LPC-DHA for brain fuel, stable blood sugar from real fermentation, gut microbiome support from fermentation byproducts, and the physical chewing that activates the trigeminal nerve pathway we discussed with the instant oatmeal section. Every mechanism we have talked about today, working together at a single meal. Canned sardines in olive oil. Available in virtually every grocery store. Under $3. No cooking required. They last years in a pantry, which means there is no excuse about freshness or preparation time. The goal of breakfast after 60 is not to eat less. It is not to eat light. It is to give your brain the specific molecular signals it needs to build new connections across the morning and stay sharp across the years ahead. Sardines on sourdough does that better than almost anything else on this list. But here is something I need you to understand before you go. Everything you just learned, the glucose stability, the DHA, the choline, the gut support, all of it depends on what your brain does at night. Because the waste your neurons generate during the day, the amyloid fragments, the metabolic byproducts, the inflammatory signals, your brain clears all of that during sleep. Not partially, almost entirely. And if the way you are sleeping right now is disrupting that clearance process, you are protecting your brain at breakfast and quietly undoing it every night. That is exactly what the next video covers. It is on your screen right now. Watch it before you do anything else, because what you just changed this morning only holds if the night catches up to it. Pick one swap from today. Just one. Make it tomorrow morning. And then watch the next video, because that is where this work continues.